Today is the third day of the September 89 7-day retreat in Springwater. Before we get into any new topic, I want to clear up something which was misunderstood yesterday by someone who heard me say that listening to the insects is an escape from facing fear. If I did say such a thing, it wasn't meant to be said. If I recall, we were with great intensity going into facing fear, this unconditional being with it. The language sounding as though there were two, there were me and my fear, but there is not two, there's only what is, unconditionally, not good or bad, wanting to be rid of it, wanting to overcome it or ignore it. But there's only what is there. Without escape. And to be subtly aware of the subtle escapes that happen. One of them being naming it fear and reacting to what one knows fear is, rather than finding out what this is right now, as it is happening, evolving. And then we said, not just to concentrate and focus attention on this churning body, the manifestations, sensations, and wherever what we call fear is manifesting in the sternum or solar plexus, stomach, head, muscles, back, front. But also listen to the insects. Not as insects, not as sound, but the listening being whole. Not just focused or concentrated upon an event within this body. Awareness is not of something, it is open. And just as whatever a fearful thought or memory or association has aroused in the body, just as that is there right now, so are all the sounds of birds, insects, wind, someone moving, a chair creaking, the breath, the heartbeat, coldness of the hand, warmth of the sun. It's all there. And if there's no idea of I must concentrate on my fear, but just listening to what's there unconditionally, then the insect, the sounds the insects are making is no distraction, it's no escape. It's there. You could say, well then what is an escape if everything is just what it is? What we're calling an escape here at this moment is a fantasy taking place which becomes so involving, so real, that the sound of the insects or the feeling of the fear is drowned out by the whatever the fantasy evokes in the body, pleasurable sensations. Or the idea I must overcome this fear causes all kinds of muscular tensions. Organs participate in this idea. And then there is not this complete, unconditional there-ness of what has already been evoked by a thought. But if an escape has taken place, bracing against it, or a fantasy about something pleasant or something comforting, then can that also be seen or listened to as a given occurrence and not be caught up in the content of it? Something that's happening, just like the sound of insects, is a fantasy that has arisen and has evoked feelings in the body. If there's awareness, there is freedom from the content. If there's no awareness, the content becomes a reality, or as though it was a reality. It is only the effect of visualization and all that goes with fantasy on the body. It's not that we're really climbing in the mountains or being with someone we love to be with. It's a video playing on some kind of a screen or no screen within the brain, affecting the whole body and distracting, as it were, from feeling the fear, which has also been aroused by fantasy. This is too complicated. Whatever is happening can appear in awareness. Needn't be concentrated upon. There's no effort that needs to be made to see something or hear something. It's just when there's openness, then whatever is seeable, feelable, or hearable, audible, is there. As it is, given the limitations of perception of this instrument, which is the human body. Can't hear certain frequencies or see certain frequencies that other living organisms can. We're not saying, and sometimes people ask me this, does the wholeness of seeing mean that one can see molecules move, or see ends of the spectrum that are not normally visible to the human eye? That's all wishful thinking, isn't it? Although sometimes people have seen it written that all of a sudden I saw molecules move. If one had never known about a molecule, would one see them move? But there's movement of sound, of the trees. And there's the slightest of breezes. Everything moves. And when there's the stillness of perception, then there's nothing that doesn't move. Without interfering with each other. When there's the slightest of breezes, when there's no breeze, there may be hardly any movement, maybe an ant crawling up a grass leaf, or a drop of dew rolling down the leaf. cloud moving, a shadow moving, someone coming up the road. But the trees can be very still. Two questions came up. About thought and thinking. One question was, am I suppressing something? In sitting here or being here or in my daily life, am I suppressing something that I'm not aware of? And the other question was about having bad thoughts and not wanting to have these bad thoughts or look at these bad thoughts, but wanting to replace them, and not just wanting to, but doing that, replacing them with good thoughts. Maybe the two will fit together, these two things. We don't know yet. We'll start out with this question, am I suppressing something? The question that came up immediately when someone asked, am I suppressing something? What is it that as one is sitting, and we were talking about that, sitting, being in a retreat, what is one doing? What is the mind doing? And in this particular case, the person said that there was following the breathing and at times counting each breath, inhalation and exhalation. Because of its great effectiveness in calming the mind, in diminishing thought, slowing down thought. And then the question, not in connection with that, we were just beginning to establish that possible connection. But the thought came up, am I suppressing something? Is there something being kept under cover, concealed? If one has trained oneself, or the mind has been trained in an exercise like concentrating on the breathing, following it, which involves some visualization, may involve visualization where one thinks the breath is coming in and going out. That may not even be accurate, but it doesn't matter for an exercise. Mind is trained to focus and concentrate on the sensation of breathing. Maybe the sound becomes easier to concentrate on it if one makes an audible sound with the breathing. And listening and sort of inward looking and sensing can be riveted to this process of breathing. And of course, if one adds the counting, then the thinking mind is also engaged in this concentrative process by counting 1, 2, 3. Trying to concentrate on keeping the count correct. So most of one's sense faculties are engaged in concentrating on breathing. And why does one concentrate on breathing? The answer is to calm down the mind, control thoughts or slow them down, have them diminish. Which means, doesn't it, as a thought arises which would be a distraction, there's maybe an increase in the concentration on the breathing. Increased intensity. Using that intensity of concentration to cut off thoughts. That's what it often is called, cutting off thoughts. What is one cutting off? One doesn't even know. Because the thinking mind and everything we've been through is riveted to paying attention to the breathing. Because it doesn't work as perfectly as it's described. One does get distracted, involved in daydreams just as any time. But if there is some awareness that this is happening, then immediately I must concentrate. I must not daydream. And no attention is given to what have I been daydreaming about? Maybe sort of a furtive glance at it. And in an instantaneous judgment, this is no good, this is a bad thought. And whatever hints or intimations may come up from deeper levels of consciousness, which we right now, for the sake of describing this, we differentiate from surface consciousness. Whatever may bubble up is also instantly suppressed, because the goal and aim is, the task is to concentrate properly on the breathing. Of course, with this kind of thing, things are being suppressed. It's inevitable, isn't it? Because the task that one sets oneself is not to openly look directly, unconditionally means non-judgmentally, at what comes up in the mind as being worthwhile to look at, to be aware of. Worthwhile not to be judged, but to be seen for what it is. It's impossible to do that when one sets oneself the task of concentrating. And when one is after the effects of such concentration, which is a palpable rise in energy, one feels more energy. Maybe some feeling of warmth. One localizes the concentration physically at some spot or area. Feeling of energy there, or warmth, power. And of course we love to have power over ourselves and over others. So there's great feedback to this whole system of myself being successful, having power, ability, and so forth, coming from a concentrative practice. Please, if you feel that I am distorting something, not saying it accurately, bring it up in meetings. We'll go over it again and look at it, and I'll look freshly. I won't insist. I'll start from scratch. If I don't, you can remind me that I'm not doing it. So, if one wants to find out, the thought comes up, the question comes up, am I suppressing something? Then the way to answer that is to let go of any kind of concentrative practices and see what comes up. Be at sea with all that comes up. Which sometimes people who have done this for years and years find is an almost overwhelming thing. All the stuff, the chaos of thoughts. One has had a little chaos, as I said. It's not a perfect thing for anybody, this concentrating. But one was sort of in control of this chaos. Felt as being a controller who had this method to control. All of which we're questioning. We're questioning who the controller is, whether there's any division between the control or the thought of a controller, the thought of the practice, and the whole process of concentrating. We're questioning all division in this mind. What it is, how it comes into being. Whether it is real or imagined. Keeping in mind that imagination can be powerful. A powerful substantiator of what one thinks is division. But it's imagination. It's thought itself. We're not going into this right now. It'll come a time for it. So, is one suppressing something? We all have learned to suppress since we've been little children. There's lots suppressed in us. Which means sort of hidden from awareness by our attention, by all kinds of non-understood mechanisms of the brain and body. And as there is an interest in what is going on in this mind, an openness to listen and look, whether it feels chaotic or not, in the midst of it, at least at times listening to the chaos as a first step. And looking at the thoughts which one thinks are bad, just really, for the first time, looking at them without judgment. Not knowing what is bad or good, but looking at what's there. Then it dawns on what all has been suppressed or repressed. And things will come up as one goes. Not to have the ambition to unearth it all. That in itself becomes a method again, to which the mind can rivet itself. Just had a correspondence in a recent newsletter, and one can become compulsive to clean out all the closets, to dig for everything. But who's the digger? The wanter of clean closet. That itself is open to inspection, to listening, feeling, touching. It's also an ancient program. I must be perfect. And if not now, become it in the future. Through practice. Perfect what? It's also one of the inventions of the human mind. I don't think any rock, flower, or animal has an idea of perfection. I don't know if there's a perfect flower or a perfect animal. There are flowers and animals. There are raccoons in the trees here right now. Never seen them before. Black and white tail, little paws, claws holding on to branch. Are they perfect? It's marvelous to watch them rustle around, or else one we watched the other day did not move. It looked as though the eyes were closed, not to just not be there, neither to see who was underneath, nor just closed eyes, everything motionless. Could see the undersoles of the feet from below. Before, I'd only seen the footprints, and here were the feet. So can we look for a little while at bad thoughts? Or where this idea arises that they're bad? We're not saying right now what the effect of thoughts are. We already have talked a lot about that. But where does the idea arise that thoughts are bad or good? We've been told that by our parents and teachers early in life. What is good, what is bad. Maybe not so much that thoughts are bad. Thoughts are sort of ignored in most of our education. I mean, moralistic education, bringing up. Actions are punished. Reactions are punished or rewarded. But imagination is very vivid. Most parents, particularly generations back, I don't know how it is now so much, have punished sexual activity in a child or between children. Punished, or at least said in no uncertain terms that this is not to happen. Not to look at each other, two children, boy and girl, not to check each other out. It's bad. Our neighborhood, a little girl was severely spanked by her parents, mother, for allowing a little boy to look at her. So, any thought about that in this little girl is bad thought. From that day on, before then there was innocency about it. But now it became a bad thought, which occurs, these thoughts occur in the mind. Parents don't address themselves to that, because they or we as parents aren't familiar with our thoughts, or are not familiar with what brings them about, how they operate. And if a parent is afraid or not in touch with thoughts, how can she be in touch with the thoughts in the child's mind? So, sexual fantasies arising in a sitting, are they felt to be bad? Or violent fantasies? The fantasies that arise in the mind are to a large extent based on experiences one has had. Repressive, punitive experiences, we're talking about that side. There are also good experiences. I'm not saying there's only the bad, or the bad in quotation marks. But that is what this person was concerned about. Based on the violence that has been done to us, and all of us have been done violence to one degree or another. From that arises fantasy, either fantasy of the act being repeated or doing it to someone else as a relief of revenge, the relief of vendettas, retribution. To the extent that any reaction in a child being punished is repressed or suppressed by the parent, child being punished for a reaction to punishment, to the extent that the imagination will take over and execute vendettas in fantasy. Or movies can serve that purpose, movies of violent movies of torture, killing. And in addition to feeling that these thoughts are bad, there's also the idea that there is a thinker who thinks these thoughts, who is bad to think these thoughts. But we're questioning what the thinker is. We're questioning that there is any entity whatsoever who has thoughts within this brain. In observing very carefully, trying to find that thinker, all one finds is thought. Thought about being a thinker. And that thought being validated or substantiated by all the thoughts that are observed. They must come from something, from some producer. It's such a radical idea. It's not a radical fact, but a radical idea that there is just a stream of thoughts which does not belong to anyone. A stream of thoughts which has flown in increasing volume for maybe hundreds of thousands of years, manifesting in human beings through memory, personal memory and collective memory. Jung has discovered or labeled maybe for the first time for the Western world the collective memory or the collective unconscious. In the Eastern meditative traditions, there has been for thousands of years the concept of a storehouse memory in which we all participate, going beyond our personal memory. And at times, maybe, if one watches dreams, one wonders where this particular thought came from or symbol. One has no recollection of ever having had any touch with any experience that would have produced that. Although one cannot trust one's memory, we've repressed so much or forgotten so much. And yet it makes sense that there is memory far beyond one's personal memory. Certainly all our parents and their parents and great-great-great-great-grandparents' memory has come along through the actions and ways of reacting, which are now manifesting in us in terms of good and bad. And the very memories that we do term good and bad, not our own private, personal, unique possession. If one begins to realize that, I don't know how this realization comes about. Sometimes it comes about by beginning to share some of these bad thoughts with others. And if there's honesty among two people, let's say just two, one may be afraid of a large group, afraid of revealing, being seen, one may find to one's great surprise and relief that very similar thoughts flow in the mind of the other person too. Not exactly the same. That's what's so tricky. And then we fixate on the differences rather than on the universalness, generalness of our ways of thinking and of our thoughts and content of our thoughts. One may have learned through punishment, through parental, just the way a parent looks or scorns or talks about sexuality among children. Or the way a parent scorns or talks about sexual attraction between people of the same sex. It's scorned, talked about in sort of indirect ways in most families, in the presence of children, unless the parent is not into condemning that. But if we haven't looked at it, we just condemn like everybody around us condemns. So the child who may be interested, the boy may be interested in boys rather than girls, and the girl interested in girls rather than boys, picks up that this is something bad, just from remarks the parents are making and reading the news, or commenting on an incident reported in the paper or in a magazine on whatever. And kids tease each other too according to what they have heard from their parents. The desire to tease is also a vendetta for humiliation suffered oneself. If one had not suffered any humiliation, which is impossible, we do, because of what we are as children and as parents, what our past has been. But if we had not suffered any humiliation at all, I don't think we would tease another. We wouldn't get that satisfaction, which is really satisfying a hurt suffered, a wound that has not healed or that is still festering, can fester for decades, for one's whole life, if it's not opened up to the light of day and looked at. One person mentioned this to me in a meeting, having talked with someone coming from an incest family. And talking about the abuse that she or he suffered. And she said, in talking, I realized that never ever had this person been able to or invited to or looked at this, at what really happened without judgment. You can say, oh, wait a minute. You can't do it. You have to judge it. It's bad. You have to express your anger. We don't have to anything. We do that, but we can question it. Whether, even though anger is there and maybe needs to be expressed, but whether that is the right way, not opposed to wrong way, just the way of looking at a wound suffered. Wound of incest, of sexual abuse. Whether one can really look at it with anger and judgment, that this was bad. I'm not saying it was good, but what was it? Can one look at it when it comes up? And be free of judgment? Do these places where people go to, where they get counsel, do they help to look at this without judgment? So that the vision is clear to look? Or is most of the help given to express the anger? I don't know. One has to, I'm not saying one can't or shouldn't express anger, but can there be a deepening clarity that as long as anger there, the vision is blurred? And the anger hooks into the deep-rooted desire for revenge. And as it turns out, a lot of rapists have been raped themselves. Molesters have been molested themselves as children. Why do we stop looking at one point and then start judging? Or never even start looking? Why do we only see the victim? And do we see the victim clearly? Do we see the rapist clearly? Which means without judgment, without anger, disgust, revolt. Without anger, disgust, revolt, and without that automatic urge for vengeance, for getting satisfaction, seeing someone else suffer as I suffer. Which keeps this stream flowing with more and more content. you could say, well, how can I look without anger or judgment? It seems to be totally impossible. Judgment is there as quickly as perception takes place. And perception can take place as quickly as judgment has taken place, as possible. May not be caught the first time or the second time, but there is a moment when it's clear there was judgment and that the vision narrowed, distorted. One can't look at something that's there. One doesn't want to look. Because there's the image of oneself not having bad thoughts. One person once told me many years ago, remembering during a retreat, a very mild-mannered, soft-spoken man, gentle, remembered having had a fit of anger, tantrum as a little child, being picked up by his mother, thrown in his room, the door closed, and told, "This is not our Frank," or whatever his name was. I just made up the name. And he remembered that. And it was a close relationship to his mother. He had to be her so-and-so. And this was not acceptable. This was bad. Probably a lot of pain went with that. A pain not to be repeated. So angry things were repressed, angry reactions. To be that lovable, gentle, soft-spoken mother's Frank or whoever. So we have built up ideal images of ourselves. It's a fact. They may be about being good or about being bad. But what we really are, we don't know. We only look at the images. And if something comes up and it doesn't fit the image, it's not looked at. It's repressed, escaped from. Or it causes so much pain that one doesn't want to. Sometimes someone says, "I don't want to go on with this work. It's too painful what I see." Not going all the way with it and finding out that when one really sees an image, as a tremendous relief, then what flows through the mind is what flows through the mind. It's that stream that we all partake of, are steeped in. By having lived together on this earth in very certain ways for thousands of years. Ways of division, antagonism, hurt, defense, dominance, power, subjugation, oppression. Why not uncover the whole thing and look at it as it manifests in oneself and not immediately identify whether this is me. I'm worse than him or her, or I'm better than him or her. And in opening it up and looking at it, there is the sound of insect. The sun, the cool air, fly knocking at the window. The breath is there. It doesn't have to be concentrated upon. It's there. And lots of people like us. Different maybe in looks and background, but so much like ourselves. In spite of what we think. We will end here for today.